Hello, my name is Giovanna Burrell, and I'm going to be talking today about Chapter 2 in our textbook, Personality and Culture, Biological Factors on Personality. Nature versus nurture, or somewhere in between. For years, the debate has been whether one's naturally inherited characteristics or the characteristics that are introduced and nurtured through one's life are the responsible factors that lead to the personality or behavior of an individual. It has since been determined that it is a combination of the two. Our environment, that is, where and how we are raised, determines which of our inherited traits is developed and how they manifest. Nature versus nurture. The best way to understand the concept in itself is to imagine its true application in animals and plants. Charles Darwin attributed the survival of plants and animal species to their ability to adapt and pass the adaptation on to the ensuing generations. While these points are true, if we take an organism that is meant to live in a dry, arid environment and place them in a wet and humid environment, likely all of the environmental feats that occurred to help them survive where they normally live will work against them. For example, if we take a lizard that lives in the desert and we drop them into a rainforest, although it is still a lizard, it is not built to live with that much humidity and moisture, and you could see things like fungal infections on the skin, respiratory issues, and even starvation because they're being forced to hunt in an environment that they are not built or equipped to do so in. Social Darwinism. Several early social scientists tried to better understand how personality was developed and began to study differences between inherited traits across races. Some proved that Aryan persons were genetically superior to other whites, as well as native or Negro populations by applying Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest to humans. They posited that due to the fact that Englishmen lived in the most developed civilizations, they therefore have the most advanced minds, skills, and abilities. This is the basis of a lot of genetic racism that we see, and some individuals that follow this line of thinking are the foundation of some of the ideals and thoughts of individuals such as Hitler. Inheriting personality. Several professionals in their respective fields in the 1970s explained the truth about inheriting personality. Personality, in a theatrical description, an alignment of the stars. To measure or collect the characteristics of a single personality, you would need to consider a specific genome, a specific trait, a specific place, and a specific time. If any one of these variables is changed, then the outcome could be drastically different. If you, for example, were to examine a Hispanic male living in California at the age of 8, and then reevaluate him at the age of 18 after moving to a state like Oklahoma, you may observe drastic differences in personality. You could have had a child that was very talkative and bubbly and outgoing, and who has turned into a young adult who is very quiet and reserved because their environments require them to behave differently in order to survive or to assimilate. Inheriting criminality. This is another issue that is highly debated, whether or not criminality is a trait that can be inherited. Historical biases have sometimes led to the assumption that positive traits are inherited in certain groups while negative ones are attributed to others. For example, the debate about whether criminal behavior is primarily genetic or environmental, thinking about if a son is shoplifting because his father is in prison. While statistics may show higher rates of criminality within certain minority groups, these disparities are more likely linked to systemic factors like poverty, lack of opportunity, and exposure to violence rather than inherent traits. if we go back to the example that I just gave, where the young man is shoplifting because his father is a convicted criminal, his father might be in prison for, having too many DUIs. His father could be in prison for selling drugs or other things. It could be a plethora of instances. His father could be in jail because of domestic abuse. However, the young man could be shoplifting because his mother is the primary breadwinner and they don't have enough food in the house. The young man could be shoplifting in order to resell those items to bring income into his family, because at his age he's not allowed to work and his mother is struggling. So when we look at the reasons, the things that are in the individual's environment that are causing the behavior, we get a fuller picture of, yes, this might have been something that was latent, but had the environment been more favorable, that particular characteristic would not have developed the way that it did. Intersectionality. When considering the effects of biology on the development of the personality, one's sex is a main factor to be considered. Intersectionality is still relatively new and describes how two or more things can be true at once. This takes into consideration the fact that a person being a woman but also belonging to a minority group will affect the development of their personality, since each of those factors come with their own unique experience and the overlap presents different challenges as well. For example, Hispanic and Black women are often seen as being aggressive or loud. If you look at Hispanic or Black people in general, they are seen as being aggressive. And being loud is associated with these particular minority women because of that kind of parallel trait, whereas white women are oftentimes associated with being quiet and submissive. For one, it's an assumption based off of the characteristics of the ethnic group as opposed to the individual person. There are Black women that are quiet and subdued. There are white women that are loud and opinionated. Just because one individual belongs to a specific minority group does not necessarily mean that their experiences are the same, and different traits and characteristics can develop because their experiences and environments require that of them. Sex on personality. Though there is a lot of conflicting data related to distinguishing traits across sex and which sex is more prone to developing what traits and characteristics based on heredity, there have been some instances where consistencies were found. One such example being higher math and quantitative skills in men and more developed verbal and writing skills in women. IQ and overall creative potential, however, are not characteristics that lean one way or another and seem even across gender. Cross-cultural analysis. The FAIR IQ test. In the book, they talk about the fact that there are limitations to the IQ test, and it's sort of an outdated test. It can be difficult to draw comparisons regarding intelligence across gender, let alone with the added layer of ethnicity. Analyzing the differences in intelligence across gender in non-Western groups specifically can be hard due to the lack of data on these groups and the reliability of the information that does exist. If most of the IQ tests that are used use the white man as the baseline or even specific minority groups, then most, if not all, the tests are biased because the racial, ethnic, and sociocultural experiences of each group are vastly different from everyone else. Thus, a non-biased measurement of inherited intelligence is not possible. This furthers the notion that environmental factors matter when determining how personality is developed. If we look at the intelligence potential of a black child that lives in a poor neighborhood versus a black child that lives and goes to school in an affluent neighborhood, even though they're both male and they're both from the same minority group, the young man who lives in and goes to school in an affluent neighborhood is going to have, regardless of his race, is going to have more opportunities and a better quality education than the young man in the less fortunate, quote unquote, situation, because there are more resources to be had in one area versus the other. So they are going to develop their minds, develop their opinions differently because those resources were or were not available. Reductionism, sociobiology. Reducing something to its most basic parts is what analysis is at its core. However, if we go too far into the minuscule pieces, we can get caught overanalyzing one piece of the puzzle. Sociobiology is a further application of such analytical processes and strives to classify behavior into inherited biological traits. As we said previously, although those traits may have been inherited and fostered through a historical biological need, the inherited characteristics still need the right environment to manifest. Expecting something like behavior to manifest just because it occurred in a previous generation doesn't necessarily align with what we know about behavior. The potential will always be there. However, skills are created and adapted to the environment. When the environment no longer calls for the skill, it will no longer manifest. For example, swimming. Humans, when you look at our physical characteristics, we are not built for swimming specifically. You look at, there are breeds of dogs that have webbed feet that allow them to move more easily in the water, and they're used for hunting things like waterfowl. You look at frogs and fish, and though their bodies are equipped to swim, we can swim only when necessary. Other animals like horses can swim when it's necessary. They're not necessarily built for swimming. But if their environment calls for swimming, oftentimes they can swim. In reality, as we've kind of touched on throughout the whole PowerPoint, it's a 50-50 almost split. Nature versus nurture, it's far too black and white a concept to describe something as complex as the human race. Just as we exist on a spectrum of colors, our personalities exist there with us. We grow simply with our genetics as a blueprint and our environment the builder. They work together to create who we are and can be used to gain insight into what we do. Thank you very much.